All right, it looks like we're right about at the 4 o'clock mark. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. My name's Leslie, and I am a program manager here at the California Air Resources Board. And on behalf of CARB, I'd like to welcome you to this virtual public workshop, which is focused on our 2026 SB 375 Regional Target Update. We're really glad to have you with us today for this important discussion. This is the second public workshop in our update processes. The first was held last July, and today's session is a valuable opportunity to share progress that we've made on the target update, really outline the timeline moving forward, and most importantly, hear your input. Your feedback is really critical as we consider what factors should guide our target recommendations, and we really appreciate your time and engagement. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Lana to get us started.
Thanks, Leslie. Hi, everyone. I'm Lana Wong with the California Air Resources Board. Before we get started today, I will give some preliminary explanations. This workshop is being held on Zoom. Note that we will be using the Q&A function, but not the chat function. If you have any technical issues, please type them into the Q&A. We will have live translation into Spanish. In your meeting and webinar controls, click Interpretation, located at the bottom of your screen. Click the language you would like to hear. Options for the meeting are in English and in Spanish. To only hear the interpreted language, click Mute Original Audio. The translator will now come on and explain how to use the system. After the explanation, we will activate the translation channel.
Gracias, Pat. Esta reunión se está transmitiendo en inglés y en español. Para acceder a la interpretación en español, por favor, dentro del control que tiene de Zoom, haga clic en el icono del globo que dice interpretación que está en el fondo de la pantalla. Si está en un dispositivo móvil, accede al menú de los 3 puntos. Selecciona el idioma que desea escuchar. Las opciones para esta reunión son de inglés y español. Si solo desea escuchar el idioma interpretado, haga clic donde dice silenciar audio original. Gracias.
To provide questions and comments, please write them in the Q&A in the center bottom of your screen. Please note that the Q&A are archived. To be added to the speaking queue, please use the raise hand function. On Zoom, click Participants, then Raise Hand. During the open public comment period, if you want to make a comment, you can type it into the Q&A function or raise your hand. We will be limiting comments today to 3 minutes in order to preserve time for everyone to speak. Also note that we will not be calling on people with raised hands until the public comment period. This workshop is being recorded, and after the workshop, we will make the recording available online on the CARB website. When joining, please check that you have your identification information correct. If not, please take a moment to rename yourself to have your first name, last name, and your affiliation. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. As I mentioned, I'm Lana Wong, a staff air pollution specialist in the Sustainable Communities Policy and Planning section at the California Air Resources Board, or CARB. Other staff we have here today include Leslie Camara-Cito, the manager of my section, and Nasamani Callinger, the manager of the Transportation Analysis section. Here is the agenda for the presentation. After some background information about SB 375, we will provide an update on the SCS regional targets for greenhouse gas emissions from passenger vehicles, as well as a brief update on the SB 150 progress report. Then we will have time for public comments and questions. CARB staff have 3 objectives for today. One is to share work we have been doing to support SB 375 regional target update, including analysis of some illustrative scenarios and feedback received so far. Another is to hear feedback from you on this work and other things you would like CARB staff to consider as we continue to refine draft targets, scenarios, and a recommendation. And related to the SB 375 targets, CARB staff want to introduce its work on the 2026 SB 150 progress report to the legislature. But before we jump into the presentation, we have a poll question to see who we have here today, which Leslie will introduce.
Great. All right, so folks should see this on their screen, and really we're just trying to get a sense of where you're participating from. So you have a couple of options here: Northern California, Greater Sacramento, Bay Area, San Joaquin Valley, Central Coast, Coastal Southern California, Inland Empire, San Diego. And then there's a second question here, which asks about your affiliation. So which one of the following organizations are you affiliated with? State of California government, regional government, local government, nonprofit organization or non-governmental organization, private organization, public participant, or other. Right. Looks like most folks have entered. We're going to go ahead and close the poll in about 3 seconds. All right, so looks like you see here we have about 10% from Central Coast. We have 22% from Coastal Southern California and about 8% from San Diego. We have a good smattering across Northern California, etc. So pretty even. So great to have you guys here. Thank you. And again, let's see, we have about 40% regional government participants, 20-ish% state, and 5% local government, 18% nonprofit, some private organizations and public. Great. Nice to have all of you guys here. Looks like we have a good representation of folks from around the state and also across different organizations. Well, glad to have you, and I hope that this becomes an engaging presentation and discussion for everyone. All right, let's get to it.
Great. And now for some background. Under Senate Bill 375 or SB 375, CARB sets targets to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from cars and light trucks for each California MPO region. To meet the targets, MPOs develop regional plans called Sustainable Community Strategies or SCSs, which identify land use and transportation strategies to reduce these emissions. The SCSs are an integral part of the regional transportation plans prepared and adopted by MPOs and are routinely updated every 4 or 5 years. These plans must be reviewed by CARB. They provide a vision for a region's future land use pattern and transportation network that will meet emission reduction targets. CARB reviews the SCS after adoption and either accepts or rejects the MPO's determination that the plan will meet the regional's SCS targets if implemented. SB 375 provides CEQA provisions for certain types of projects. In addition, certain state funding pots have eligibility or prioritization criteria for projects that are within a region's approved SCS. An MPO region that is unable to create a SCS that meets the GHG reduction targets must create an alternative planning strategy, or APS, that shows how the region could meet the targets. In that case, the region would become ineligible for certain transportation funding pots. By SB 375 is applied at the scale of MPO regions, and the targets can be different for every region. This map shows the 18 MPO regions in California in orange. The green areas are not subject to SB 375. Next to the map are the current 18 GHG reduction targets for 2035 that apply to each MPO SCS, as adopted by CARB's board in March 2018. Currently, most MPOs have developed and CARB has evaluated 3 rounds of SCSs, and most regions around the state are in the process of creating their 4th SCS to meet the GHG targets set by CARB. Once an MPO adopts its SCS, they submit the SCS to CARB for evaluation of the MPO's determination. To do that evaluation, CARB uses a set of guidelines, last updated in 2019, to assist in the review of the MPO's SCS. There are many similarities in SCS strategies across regions, with focus areas in land use, transportation, pricing, zero-emission vehicles, and new mobility. This slide provides an example of typical SCS strategies MPOs currently use to achieve their GHG targets. It's important to note that the use of strategies is regional and context-specific, and not all MPOs use each of these strategies listed. Now we will move on to the target update. To guide development of the SCS, SB 375 requires that CARB establish targets for GHG emission reductions for cars and light trucks. It also requires that we update them at least every 8 years, and that we set targets for 2035. The new GHG reduction targets should be completed in 2026 and will be applicable for fifth round SCSs. Alongside this, CARB is updating its SCS evaluation guidelines, which are expected to conclude in spring 2027, with the goal of still providing a reasonable amount of notice in advance of the fifth cycle SCS. Target levels impact the amount of effort and investments needed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and impacts of driving from a region's SCS. At its heart, creating SCSs can make it possible for people to drive less and improve both climate performance and equity in a region. The targets and the target setting process are also essential ways that SB 375 contributes to the overall California climate goals as stated in the scoping plan. This is the target update timeline. The seasons and years run from left to right. The labels below show key points in the timeline. The target update process to date has included informal conversations with MPOs, NGOs, and state partners in spring 2024 and 2025, a public workshop and MPO information request in summer 2024. We've been gathering data and drafting preliminary scenarios since fall 2024, and this second public workshop is for the target update. Overall, through the following year through early 2026, CARB will do additional work on the report and environmental analysis. We will release a final report and hope to have a board-adopted new targets in mid-2026. These will become effective for fifth cycle SCSs, which will generally be those adopted after 2026. Since the last target update in 2018, there have been a great number of legislative, technological, and societal changes that may be considered in this target setting round. Some of these considerations and their relationship to regional GHG emissions from travel are clear, while others are less certain. CARB staff work in this process includes gathering information on these factors and assessing what the net effect on targets could be. There are many sources of information and data that will be inputs to the target recommendation. Among these are the scoping plan recommendations and the SB 150 report, which I will discuss in the next slides. We recognize that technology and society are rapidly changing. The target recommendations will incorporate considerations of the latest research on GHG reduction strategies and broader travel behavior changes that may affect emissions and driving. Among these are topics like telework and autonomous vehicles. And comments we receive in this process from MPOs, NGOs, state agencies, and the public, such as what we hope to receive today and during other critical milestones on the target, and how it should be evaluated. These will be important inputs to help CARB staff better understand what is happening in each region and what may or may not be possible in each region. Public comments will be crucial to inform the target recommendations and ground the process in the knowledge and aspirations of all Californians. One of CARB's major roles for the state is to develop a climate change scoping plan that describes the approach California will take to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to meet its climate goals. The first scoping plan was approved by CARB's board in 2008 and was recently adopted in November 2022. This plan assesses progress towards California's 2030 GHG reduction target and lays out a path to achieving carbon neutrality no later than 2045. Where this work intersects with SB 375 targets is in the tracking and strategic reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. Specifically, the scoping plan considers transportation sector emissions from 3 categories: technology, which is the vehicles themselves; fuel, which is the energy source used to power vehicles; and vehicle travel, measured as vehicles miles traveled, or VMT. The scoping plan shows that meeting the state's climate targets will require actions to reduce emissions from all 3 categories. The scoping plan has included sustainable community strategies since its inception as one available tool to help address emissions from vehicle travel category, and the 2022 update reaffirmed the need for SCSs to address California's transportation emissions. Similar to our previous SCS target setting process, CARB's illustrative target scenario process looks at alignment with the scoping plan. The 2022 scoping plan identifies reductions in VMT as a necessary part of the statewide strategy to achieve California's 2045 carbon neutrality goal. The scoping plan proposes reducing VMT per capita from 24.6 miles per day in 2019 to 18.4 miles by 2030, a 25% reduction, and 17.2 miles per day by 2045, a 30% reduction. CARB staff is also in charge of tracking progress in implementation of SCSs across California under Senate Bill 150, or SB 150, which was passed in 2017. For this, CARB staff collects, analyzes, and reports on over 24 metrics to help assess progress. We also survey and interview MPO staff, NGOs, and other practitioners to report out on effects of recent policies, the latest SCS planning and implementation practices, and any barriers and opportunities to implementation. CARB prepared the first progress report in 2018 and issued the latest report in June 2023. CARB also maintains a dashboard of data relevant to SB 150. This information provides valuable context to help understand the progress of SCSs and will be a key input to the target update process. The latest progress reports show that California is still not reducing GHG emissions from personal vehicle travel as needed to meet climate commitments and as targeted under SB 375. Per capita GHG emissions and per capita VMT continue to increase, though more slowly than the 2018 SB 150 progress report. Now we will discuss the illustrative target scenarios. CARB's illustrative target scenarios include 2 scoping plan-based scenarios and 1 SCS-based scenario. Scenario 1 uses back calculation, which finds the 2035 SCS target value by working backwards from the scoping plan's 2045 VMT target, then translates it into a GHG target. Scenario 2 uses interpolation, which finds the 2035 SCS target value between the scoping plan's 2030 and 2045 VMT targets, then translates it into a GHG target. Scenario 3 is based on the current SCS targets. To summarize, the current overall per capita GHG target is 19% for 2035 compared to 2005. Depending on the scoping plan-based scenario, a new overall per capita GHG reduction target could be increased between 22 or 28%. It's important to note that the results shown on this slide reflect a statewide target calculation that will be further processed for each MPO. Now we will talk about what feedback we have received so far. CARB staff have received a range of input from discussions with other state agencies, the MPOs responsible for developing the SCSs, and NGOs. We wanted to use this opportunity to share at a high level what we have heard already. We've organized the comments by theme. Because we engaged a wide range of interested parties, we have gotten some feedback that does not fit neatly into a single theme, and some feedback that is in direct opposition of other feedback. That is why it's important to hear from a variety of voices. We heard achieving VMT reduction is an important goal, and a lack of SES progress should not be reason for lack of ambition. Targets should be maximum feasible. A focus on VMT reduction will be more important with federal resistance to climate sustainability and the coming of automated vehicles. And reducing VMT has many important co-benefits. But we also heard achieving the current targets is a challenge and requires a lot of effort to implement. Targets should remain the same or in some regions be even lower. The time to achieve targets by 2035 will make it harder. Loss of federal funding and changes at the federal level could make it even harder to implement the SES strategies. The scoping plan is not fiscally constrained, so it is not a reasonable target. Some of the feedback was about focusing on implementation. More time and effort should be spent on implementation and not technical details of achieving a target. Increasing the target without additional tools or funding for SES strategies won't lead to more implementation. We heard changing populations and demographics has an impact. Pent-up housing demand will cause housing growth even with low or no population growth. Population growth is happening in areas with the fewest alternatives to vehicle travel. Changes in life stages for population, such as aging population and university enrollments, impact vehicle travel. Change in research findings and exogenous factors, such as lower population growth, will make it harder to achieve the existing targets. Other exogenous factors, like wildfires, can impact populations and increase VMT. Lastly, this is somewhat of a catch-all theme of feedback we've got specifically on the scenarios, target calculation, and overall process. Transparency in the process and target calculation is important. Target and guidelines impact each other, and clear understanding of both is needed together. Targets should reconcile conflicting state goals. We heard from one person an idea to consider a scenario that assumes the current trends of VMT increasing going forward, and almost the direct opposite, we heard another person to consider a scenario that is as ambitious as possible, such as removing highway expansion. We also heard to consider a scenario that looks at target reductions coming from transportation projects only, and to consider a recession. For the next steps, we will hear your thoughts and comments. We will synthesize and consider the comments received, further develop and share draft target scenarios and recommendations, continue the environmental review process, and further develop and share evaluation guidelines, updates, and recommendations. Now I'll hand it over to Leslie for some more poll questions.
Thanks, Lana. Appreciate it. So we're going to go through just a couple of series of questions now, kind of give you big picture and understanding. I want to understand from you guys, based on the presentation, do you understand the three scenarios that were presented? You have an agree or disagree choice here. And if you disagree, can you please give us some details in the box? Give you guys a little bit. Okay. Give folks about 3 more seconds to get their answers in. Okay. It looks like the majority of folks agree that they understand the scenarios. There's still about a third of us who have some questions on this. So we'll take a look at some of the entries that we got, and hopefully we can expand a little bit more on that in the Q&A session. All right, let's go into the second question. And this one's a little bit longer, but this is really about priorities for program targets. So the question is, what should Sustainable Community Strategies targets focus on achieving? And you have the ask of selecting up to 2 priorities that are the most important to you. And your options are building homes people can afford near jobs, schools, and transit. Another option is expanding travel options like biking, walking, and public transit. Next option is managing traffic more efficiently using current roadways. Improving safety for people walking, biking, driving, and using transit, or other. And then again, if you have selected other for any of your priorities, there's an opportunity to provide us with some more details. All right. This one takes a little bit more. We're just about a 50% of folks entering. All right, we're rising. So I'm going to ask folks to wrap up your responses in the next 5 seconds if possible, and we'll share out. All right. So it looks like here, a lot of emphases, top 2, building homes people can afford in strategic places, and then expanding our travel options. And close behind that, improving safety for those people who are walking, biking, driving, and using transit. Thank you. That's really helpful for us as we think through some of the design of the targets and what we're trying to get out of the targets and sustainable community strategies. All right, last one. Okay, this one may take a little explaining, but the idea is to get your thoughts on considerations for setting the targets and what factors should be the most important when setting regional program targets. And so right here, you're going to need to select on each of these rows. So make sure that you do that, else it won't enter to us. And the idea is that plus plus means that highest priority, minus being lowest priority. And it looks like we're right at about 25% of responses, getting up to a third. All right. Let's go ahead and get our answers in hopefully the next 5 seconds. All right, let's see. Oh, this is a tough one. Looks like we have a lot of people think all of these are priorities, is my interpretation of the data here. So I know it's hard, right? Really hard. We want to push all of these priorities moving forward. So I just like, let's see. Financial feasibility, if folks are interested, was voted top by 63% of folks. And then what do we have? About 43% voting urgent need to address climate change and air pollution. The second. And very close to that is population size and demographic changes. That's top. All right. Thank you for that. Hopefully that helped to get us all thinking a little bit about the challenges moving forward as we think through recommendations and putting together scenarios and setting targets. All right. Well, with that, I think we can move on into the next portion of our presentation. Lana?
Yeah, thank you all for your input on the polls. Although today's workshop is not focused on the SB 150 report, it is a related effort, and we wanted to use a few minutes today to provide an update on it. So CARB staff is in the process of updating this report, data, findings, and recommendations. The updated report is due to the legislature in 2026. We don't have more to present on the report at this time, but we wanted to make sure everyone is aware of the effort and the timeline. And now Leslie will introduce another poll to get your opinion from your individual community to help inform the report.
Right. It's a little bit of a longer one, but I think, as you guys have heard, we are developing the 2026 update to the SB 150 progress report. The 2018 and 2022 versions of this report showed that California is not on track toward achieving our greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals from passenger vehicles. So from your perspective, for your community, we are wondering which of these items would be most useful to you in achieving the state's goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And we'd ask that you select one as most important. And the options here, similar to some that we've been talking about earlier, but more housing, jobs, and amenities near each other. The second option is more transit options or more frequent transit. Third, more bicycling and walking options. Fourth, road and or parking charges. Fifth, less highway widening. And the last option here is zero emission electric vehicles. Let's see, we will try and get our answers in the next 5 seconds. We will share out. All right. Well, top, housing, jobs and amenities near each other. Great. And then kind of evenish distribution amongst the more transit options, zero emission vehicles, road and parking charges. And then smaller, but still votes on less highway widening and more bicycle walk options. Interesting. Thank you guys for that input. That'll be helpful as we move forward in developing the next iteration of the 150 report. All right, well, we'll head back over into the program. Lana, do you want to take us into the next portion?
Yeah, so we're now going to open the workshop for public questions and comments. As I mentioned before, to keep time for more people to speak, we ask that commenters stay within 3 minutes, and we will have an on-screen timer to show how much time is left. If you would like to speak, please use the raise hand function in Zoom. When it is your turn, we will call out your name and we'll unmute you. If you would like to write a comment or question, you can use the Q&A function. Now we'll go into the comments and questions.
Okay, all right, thanks, Lana. My name is John Butler, and I'm also with the California Air Resources Board. We'll be taking comments and answering questions now. Answering the questions will be Lana Wong, Leslie Camirazito, and Nesamani Kalandier, all here at CARB and on screen. We'll start with the questions in the written Q&A system that we've already received. I've also enabled the raise hand function. If you have a question or comment, please raise your hand. When it is your turn, I will call out your name and enable you to unmute yourself. So I think we'll start with a written Q&A. Do we have any that the panelists want to answer live?
Yeah, let's see. So I'll start. I know that we got one question here from Mike Bullock about why don't you talk to those in CARB that did the scoping plan? They seem much more in touch with reality, no offense intended. I just, maybe not so much a question, but I did want to assure you, Mike, we do coordinate with the other folks who lead the scoping plan process and are definitely working with them as we move forward into the next scoping plan update. I see your hand up, so I know we'll hear more necessarily in the comments, but I do want to assure you that we do work in coordination with folks who help to develop the scoping plan. And let's see, I know there's another question here, it looks like from Colin Clark. I know Mani would like to answer this one, but this one, I'll just read it out loud. And then maybe Mani can pop on and give some detail. The question is, why are autonomous vehicles listed under research if thousands, some for transit and first last mile connectivity to transit, are already operational and in service on public streets in multiple jurisdictions throughout California and the US? Suggestion to replace on the slide with research and development.
Yeah, thanks, Leslie. Thanks for the question as well. I think right now, I think the impact of autonomous vehicles still is evolving. So that's where the research work is undergoing. We would like to better understand what are the contributions of the VMT and GHG impacts of autonomous vehicle. So that's the reason why we kind of indicated in the research. So it'll be, the studies will go on and then we'll find the results and then appropriately as part of the guidelines development, we'll develop the methodology and that will be considered in the future SCS as well. So that's what it is ongoing here. Leslie, you're muted, I think.
Thank you. I'm just saying that I see a couple of questions in the Q&A about the scenarios in terms of, hey, what if we understand them, but we don't agree with them? Or will there be basically another chance to take a look at the scenarios to think and provide comments later? Yes, the answer is yes. We will be, and we have posted the presentation materials on our website. We can also send them to you should you like to see them more. And there is opportunity to provide us further comments after this workshop. So please do, and we'll have a web or an email box put up so that you can submit those. But also you're very welcome to raise your hand, and if you feel comfortable, let us know more about why you don't agree with them. All right. See anything else in here? And I see a question about, will the video or transcript of this workshop be available? And yes, it will be. This is being recorded and we will be posting this on the website. I think, John, is it about a week and a half time period after, or?
Yeah, well, it should be around now.
Got it. All right. And looks like it looks like there's another question here. Says, I think electric vehicles VMT should be completely out of equation in calculating the GHG reduction. After all, it's a clean energy emission, and it isn't that we're focusing on, at least for now, when compared to the gasoline vehicles. We can't meet the targets if we still consider this clean VMT, although not 100% clean. I see Mani is interested in commenting on this one.
Sure. Yeah, Leslie, I think this is also related to the scenario, that the scoping plan scenario. So maybe I just want to give that big picture context here. As you may know, that scoping plan takes into, as Lana was going through the slide, the scoping plan already takes into consideration of technology, fuels, and VMT. So that's how it's already all the clean vehicles and clean technology is already taken into consideration before this VMT target was established as part of the scoping plan. 25% below 2019 level by 2030 and 30% below 2019 level by 2045. Those two targets were established after considering all the clean technology and fuels, everything. So that's the reason why right now the SB 375 focuses the VMT target is with the scoping plan target is translated into the SB 375 target. Those are the scenario 1 and 2 that's explained here. So yeah, maybe if you have more questions, we'll be happy to explain more in detail about the scenario 1 and 2 and walk you through in detail as well.
Sounds like there was interest in showing that slide again. I don't know, Lana, if that's something you can toggle back to.
Yeah.
Yeah, just give me 1 second.
Thanks.
Thanks, Lana, for sharing it. Maybe I can explain the scenario 1 and 2. I think that's where some of you commented that you want to better understand more in detail. As I said earlier, the scoping plan established the target for 2030 and 2045. That is, VMT target is 25% below 2019 level by 2030 and 30% below 2019 level by 2045. So as you may know, that for SB 375 program, the target year is 2035. So what we did is use the 2045, the scenario 1. For the scenario 1, we took the 2045 target and backcasted for 2035. And then with reference to 2005, that translates to 22% below 2005 level GHG target. That's the scenario 1. Okay. And then for scenario 2, we took both targets, the 2030 target as well as 2045 target from the scoping plan, we interpolated for 2035. So which translated again to 28% below 2005 level in calendar year 2035 under the SB 375 program. So that's the two scenario came from scoping plan. As Lana already explained, the scenario 3 is the existing target that's 19% below 2005 level. So those are the three scenarios that it's in front of you. If you have more detail, if you need more details, please let us know. I can even go more detail if needed. Yeah.
Right. Okay. There are a couple of comments have come in to the Q&A that I will go ahead and read, and then maybe then, John, we can go to the raise hand folks. So a couple of things I will read out. Received a comment from Karen Busty Westmont. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. To capture more sources of VMT, consider that the big MPOs do not plan enough housing, but expect neighboring regions to provide the housing. Please evaluate Cal HCD's determinations of housing need compared to the law's mandate. As a former preparer of those RHND myself some years ago, IP that Cal HCD's determinations accept the crises conditions as normal and only adjusted regional housing needs determinations for counties that have worse than average conditions. One way to capture these two planning failures would be to measure emissions forced into neighbors' air basins by MPOs who do not plan enough housing. Thanks for that comment and suggestion, Karen. I know that we have put on our list definitely looking at and exploring more about the latest RHNA and alignment with SCSs. I think this one is interesting in that I know that a lot more of the housing in terms of the latest cycle has been more and more incorporated into these SCSs. So this is a good thing and a very big focus since the last target update process we had. All right. And Lauren Beauregard has a question. It says, I'm new to SB 375. With the 3 illustrative scenarios, is the plan to choose the best one? And actually, I think that's why we're here. Part of what we're trying to understand from stakeholders and others who are engaged in this conversation is, what is it that CARB staff should really be thinking about and putting forward a recommendation on the scenarios? What we've put forward here in the presentation are, we say, illustrative, because there are a couple things going on in terms of one, the scoping plan based scenarios suggest this is what is needed to meet basically our climate targets for the state. At the same time, we understand and have been hearing a number of the challenges out there in terms of the current SCSs that include a number of strategies. And we ourselves at CARB maintain a number of data points basically observed, in which we also see that there are a number of implementation challenges along with this. And so we're very curious about what folks think is the pathway forward in target design for this program. All right, so I think see a lot of comments and questions from Mike, and I see his hand up there. So maybe, John, if you want to do a little bit of the raise hand, folks, and then I will continue looking through the Q&A that we have received.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Leslie. So we'll now go to some live questions and comments. We'll go in the order of hands were raised on Zoom, at least what Zoom is showing me. So when it's your turn, I will call out your name and enable you to unmute. Once you begin speaking, please limit yourself to 3 minutes. We will have a timer which shows on the top right of the Zoom window, and I will let you know when you have 30 seconds left. Okay, so I am going to try to unmute Mike Bullock.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Well, it's clear to me that scenario 2 is really the only scenario that should be considered. And the reason for that is the most important climate mandate is the first one that comes around, and that's SB 30. I'm sorry, SB 32, which corresponds to the year of 2030. There's another mandate, net zero by 2045, but that's off in the future. And both of these are critical mandates. Now, you can just assume that California knows what they're talking about, but there's a lot of reasons that SB 32 is correct, and it is a rather difficult reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, and it does correspond to what the UN is doing. And I kind of think you guys should talk a little bit about the UN's work, that is the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and their COP meetings. They are focused on 2030. That's really all they're focused on. They want nations to commit to reductions by 2030. What's the big deal about 2030? Well, the climate scientists tell us that that is a climate stabilization requirement to get that reduction down there. And that's pretty obvious from the NOAA charts. And I think that anybody who works at CARB should be very familiar with the NOAA plots. And those NOAA plots should be presented to us, the general public, because they are not well known. And they show that we are living in an outrageous spike of atmospheric CO2. 420 parts per million. Obviously, it should be 275. That's what it's been for thousands of years. And that's clear from those charts. And the temperature anomaly, which corresponds to 425, is like 10 degrees, or it's just outrageous. And so it looks like we're doomed if you look at those, but the climate scientists tell us, no, we're not doomed. But 2030 is soon, and we have a shot. And I don't think we're going to do it because we just don't seem to be sufficiently interested. So I actually think that CARB should be having educational Zoom meetings where you explain what we're up against. You know, why this has been called a code red climate emergency by the Secretary General of the UN, why he says we're dangerously close to the point of no return. What does he mean by that?
About 30 seconds, please.
And so those things need to be explained. And by the way, I really like the CARB scoping plan. You know, they don't show their work, but I've done the work and I know they're in the ballpark. That minus 25%, I compute minus 32, but that's about the same as 25. I'll accept that. But that is hard to do. But Appendix D and E has the mitigation measures. So why are you reworking the problem and asking the public for our ideas? It's clear: pricing. And yes, double the transit service. That's also in there. And then all the other things that you talk about, they're all good. We need all of those things. But the problem is 2030 is very, very soon. And most of the cars are going to be internal combustion engine cars in 2030. And, you know, what
Thank
we're
you,
hearing.
Mike.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, and this is all good. Yeah, please send any more thoughts. Thanks a lot. Thank you. And now I'll unmute Dave Valton.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Dave Vaughton with the Metropolitan Transportation Commission and the Association of Bay Area Governments. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on the proposed targets for the next cycle of regional plans throughout California. MTC and ABAG have established a bold regional vision that channels nearly all growth within existing urban growth boundaries, allocates the vast majority of transportation funding towards public transit, advances expansive road pricing strategies, and deeply weaves equity and resilience throughout our long-range plan, known as Plan Bay Area. But more importantly, we have been actively implementing this climate-friendly vision by funding critical investments like electric vehicle chargers, advancing policies to encourage jurisdictions to densify near major transit hubs, and working to secure critical dollars to keep our transit systems from falling off of a fiscal cliff. With increasingly constrained funding and growing federal uncertainty, the existing 19% GHG target remains a very ambitious goal that requires action at all levels of government to fully realize. Given that, we would support retaining the 19% GHG reduction target for the next cycle of SCSs. This will allow regions to focus on implementing the bold ideas in their plans in the real world, rather than having to channel finite staff, funding, and board bandwidth towards an increasingly complex long-range planning process. Furthermore, we ask that CARB provide greater clarity about its technical assumptions associated with the proposed GHG targets, including treatment of zero-emission vehicles and associated investments. We firmly believe that regions and local jurisdictions have a critical role to play in accelerating the transition to EVs, and we encourage CARB to reward and not discourage action at the local and regional scales, given the significant climate benefits. Should CARB limit or prohibit regions from investing in clean vehicles in the SCS process, these proposed targets should be adjusted accordingly to reflect such limitations, as this will make it much harder to achieve said targets. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Dave. And we have no further hands raised at this time.
Thanks, John. I have a couple of more questions, comments coming in through the Q&A function. I'll go ahead and go through. From Santosh Vadarai, have you considered the decreasing population forecast for our 2035 scenario? Our population growth is slashed by 50% compared to the last SCS, making it very challenging to hit the existing targets. Yes, Santosh, we have heard a number of those concerns from regions across the state and are very much aware of the population forecast change that's related to the forecasts that are currently in the SCSs. And I do hear that it is potentially something that folks would be able to put some numbers to, but I hear the general concern there, and we're open to hearing more about how that may particularly impact particular regions' targets. So if you guys have any further data on that, that would be much appreciated. But I think one thing that I wanted to highlight for folks is that, you know, on this slide, what we're showing, these illustrative scenarios are really in aggregate, right? So this is from a statewide point of view. As staff move forward, we will be looking at, because our charge is to update targets for each of the MPO regions, we will be looking at how does that affect each of the regions specifically. So that's why it's really important to hear from each of the regions. You know, you guys have unique contexts. Another comment question is scenario 3 target minus 19% only for 2035. Yes, this is what we are looking at here. It's represented for the 2035 target update, correct? And then there's another question here about previously there was a gap of 6%, 25% goal versus 19% target for MPOs. Is the gap still existing, and do scenario 1 and 2 intend to close the gap? So this is interesting. I'm guessing that who wrote this question is referring to a previous scoping plan and the last target update. And then is there a gap still existing? I think that's what we're discussing today, is what should, or what are folks' feelings about what the target should be updated to. So curious to hear input on that. And question here, kind of aligning some more with some of the things we heard verbally. Moen Kaloi, sorry if I did not pronounce that correctly, but says, I'm curious how the prospective financial challenges, example being federal fund reductions, are considered in the targets. And I think that is very much something that we have heard some details from particular regions, and we are very interested to understand more about how those challenges will affect the ability of folks to include particular GHG reducing measures inside their SCSs moving forward. So it is something that we are aware of and we are interested, and we have heard from folks, this is definitely a challenge and we'd like to collect more information on. So, but it is something that staff is looking to incorporate as it moves forward. And let's see, comment from an anonymous attendee. Californians need to be able to afford their transportation, so please stop with the outrageous gas taxes. Another comment question. Target should ideally be SMART, so specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. Does CARB staff feel that these targets are SMART with a focus on achievable, the A portion? Maybe these targets, meaning the current targets, I'm not sure. I mean, or is it whether these targets that we're asking about should be achievable? And I'll just give a little history there in that, I think that staff have always heard direction from our board that targets should be ambitious and achievable. And so that is what they have striven and asked our staff to consider as we put forward recommendations. I think it's good to hear from folks about what they think is achievable and what they think defines ambitious as well. And I think we're hearing some of those factors today. Would love to hear more. If folks have more in terms of guidance on that. Let's see. All right. We have a question from, can you please reiterate the targets for 2030 and 2045 below 2019 levels and where this information can be found? Moni, do you want to go ahead and answer that?
Sure, yeah, I can repeat the target slowly. I think the scoping plan target for calendar year 2030, it's 25% below 2019 level. And then for calendar year 2045, it's 30% below 2019 level. You can find this in the scoping plan document. If I remember, I think the chapter 3, but we can send it to you once exact page number and the chapter after this workshop. We'll be happy to share it with you, specific page number in that way.
Thanks, Moni. All right, so there's another question here about if there's any plan to set targets for a future year beyond 2035. And right now, the statute actually gives CARB authority to set targets for 2020 and 2035, but not beyond. Let's see. Then we have a comment from Heather Adamson. AMBAG agrees with the comments made by Dave Vaughton, MTC ABAG, and that we think the existing 2035 target is ambitious and should not be raised for regions. Thanks for that comment, Heather. Right. I know I've received a number of additional comments from Mike, and I appreciate, Mike, you putting in your email address here where we can contact you more about these things. And I appreciate you participating in the raise hand portion. I don't know if anyone else has things so that we give everyone a chance. Then I see another comment came in from Santosh Bhattarai. I would like to agree with Dave and Heather's comment. Thanks, Santosh. Yes, and for the folks who do not know, Santosh represents Fresno Council of Governments. Right, it looks like we have another hand up, maybe John. Oh, it went away. All right, well, it looks like we've slowed down on questions. I know, Mike, you have a lot of comments for us. I'm going to offer to reach out to you separately. And I do have your contact information, so I'm happy to do that. For other folks, I just wanted to reinforce that this is not your last opportunity to comment on the scenarios or give us input as we move toward recommendations on the target update. Maybe ask I'm not sure if someone has the last slide, which has our Sustainable Communities email address. This is the one that folks should use to contact us after, the workshop itself. If you have additional ideas, think of something. And I just want to thank everyone, for you guys taking the time today and for your thoughtful input at this workshop. I really want to emphasize that your engagement is an essential part of our target update process, and we value your perspectives. I think as we move forward, CARB staff is going to carefully consider the input that we received today, along with the input that we've received along the way as we continue developing our recommendations. We are committed to a very transparent and inclusive process, and your involvement will help ensure that the final outcomes of the target process really reflect the needs and priorities of the communities across California. So again, if you have any additional comments and questions, we do welcome them. Please reach out to us directly at the Sustainable Communities email box as shown on this slide. Again, I just want to thank everyone for being here and contributing to this important work. Have a great evening, everyone. Thank you.